I'm Kylie Grimacy, and this is my case analysis. So, according to Richard Lee, YSTRs can be used for male-specific testing. YSTRs are used in cases like sexual assault cases or missing person cases, but more specifically to look at sexual assault cases. They're helpful in these instances where there's a presence of a mixture of female DNA and male DNA, because when you're looking at these mixtures, all you're actually looking for is that YSTR loci within that mixture to confirm that there was a male DNA present. And it's nice just because these YSTR loci don't actually interfere at all with the female DNA during the investigation, so that's also nice. YSTR is done by providing paternal lineages of the sample's origin in order to determine the origin of that sample. So the identification process can be done through that YSTR loci. Richard Lee also talked about mitochondrial DNA analysis and how it's used to look at evidence samples that have small amounts of nuclear DNA or nuclear DNA that has degraded over time. So these are samples like skeletal or decomposed remains, hair shafts, bones, teeth, stuff like that. And in order to actually extract that mitochondrial DNA from those samples, the samples have to be pulverized. And the reason that we're doing mitochondrial DNA and analysis and not normal STR analysis is just because in these types of samples, the amount of nuclear DNA present is not a lot. And mitochondrial DNA that's present is a lot, and there's a lot of copies of it, and it's so small that it's more likely to be present. So it just gives us a better chance of getting good results. And then both YSTR and mitochondrial DNA analysis are not confirmatory assays, meaning they're not ensuring that that individual is attached to that sample, but it does help narrow down the scope of things and eliminate possible suspects as well. All right, now on to the case. Just to give you a heads up, this case is a little intense. It involves murder and child rape, so just prepare yourself if you're okay with that moving forward. Looking at the case details of the state of Tennessee versus Paul William Ware, this happened in 1994, the incident. The trial happened in 1999. 27-year-old Paul Ware was on trial for murder and for 2 counts of rape of 4-year-old Lindsey Green. This happened in Hamilton County, Tennessee. Just to throw it out there at the beginning so you know he got what he deserved. After the course of the trial, he was convicted of felony murder and 2 counts of child rape and was sentenced for life without parole for the murder and consecutive 25-year sentence for the rape. So, to the night of the incident, Ware went out drinking that night with Lindsey Ware's parents, and Paul Crum was the babysitter, and he stayed home with her and babysat, and they were watching movies all night, and she ended up falling asleep on the couch, so he moved her to the bedroom. Closed the door, and continued to watch movies. Later that evening, Paul Ware came home, stumbling, drunk, just wasted, and said he was going to go to bed to Crum. He ended up going into the same room that Lindsey was in and shut the door. Crum continued to watch a movie, and shortly after, he heard a couple thuds. I don't know why, but he wasn't concerned at this, and he never investigated it. Moving along to early hours of the morning, the parents arrive home, and they wanted to check on their kid, so they asked where she was. Crum said that she was sleeping and Ware was also in there in that first room. And so they went to go check on her, tried to open the door, and it was locked. So they went and grabbed a knife from the kitchen and was trying to pick the door. Once they got in, they saw them nowhere. They saw the bed in disarray and their clothes scattered throughout the room. This obviously was alarming. The only other thing in the room was a utility closet on the other side. So they went over there, opened the door, and there lay Ware and Lindsay nude on the ground. Ware was passed out drunk, and the victim was cold and blue on the ground. Her parents grabbed her and took her to the hospital as fast as they could. They did life-saving procedures there and had no luck. Upon further investigation, they saw her vagina and her rectum were tore open, and she had internal bleeding that had occurred. Yeah. So the coroner determined her death. The cause of death was mechanical asphyxia, along with other injuries, and they did a rape kit on her and didn't find any male semen or additional blood DNA on her. The only things they did find was they found a hair on the sheets. They found hairs inside of her vagina, inside of her rectum, around the skin of her anus, in her mouth. The worst of all, they even found hair inside of her pharynx. This is something that should never happen. Hair shouldn't end up there unless it's forcefully placed there. So those hairs were then tested. This happened in 1996, and it was actually the first time mitochondrial DNA evidence was ever used in a courtroom in Tennessee. So they extracted the mitochondrial DNA from the recovered hairs and tested those and compared them to mitochondrial DNA that they extracted out of Ware's saliva, and they also tested it against the mitochondrial DNA extracted from the victim's blood as well. So they compared the hair found on the sheet to the hair inside of her pharynx, and they were a match. They then compared those hairs to the mitochondrial DNA extracted from Ware's saliva, and they were a match. And then to confirm that they were not a match for the victim and did not belong to the victim, they tested the mitochondrial DNA extracted from her blood, and you guessed it, it was not a match. So, not saying that this is 100% him, but it definitely doesn't look good for him. So STR analysis wasn't used in this case. There was actually a case synopsis done by Leland Davis, and in it he mentions how traditional STR analysis wouldn't have worked here because there wasn't semen, there wasn't blood present on the victim or on Ware. So the amount of nuclear DNA that was actually present in the only thing we found, which is the hairs, is so small it would make it really difficult to isolate that. So since there's a lot of mitochondrial DNA found in the hairs because they're so small and there's so many copies of it, they thought this was a better technique. So that is what they did for the analysis. So mitochondrial DNA, how did it help in this case? Like Davis mentioned before in his synopsis, there was no semen or blood present to do typical STR analysis. So mitochondrial DNA analysis was the way to go. Other than that, there was no evidence. There was only there was circumstantial evidence placing him in that room with her naked, and that was it. And during the course of the trial, according to the case details document I was looking at, he argued that he was drunk and can't remember anything, but he thinks Crum was trying to frame him and place him there himself. So they didn't have anything other than that he was with her when they found her. So finding those hairs and having them be a match to him helped tremendously. And then again, the outcome of the case, based on those case details I was reading, after the course of the trial, he was convicted of felony murder and the 2 counts of child rape. He was sentenced to life without parole for the murder and a consecutive 25-year sentence for the rape.